everyone. Welcome to the Genesis Ag Podcast. This is Chris Allison, and I'm here today with Mark Rothermich, Product Specialist with Genesis Ag.
Chris, thanks for having me on today. I always enjoy getting the opportunity to share a little bit of what's happening, some of the things that we're seeing out here.
Mark, we want to talk a little bit today about the increasingly high cost of inputs we're seeing in agriculture. I think within the past month, I saw an article this morning that these were going anywhere from, 18 to almost 30% increase in just a month. And so this is going to have a tremendous impact on not only our farmers, but our food prices across the country and even the world. So can you tell me what you're seeing out there and what you're hearing from your customers?
Chris, this has been an ongoing story for most of our producers since last spring. Prices have been on the increase for almost all of their inputs. And instead of slowing down, it almost looks like it's speeding up as we go into the fall and the winter time frame. And there is, as you mentioned, a lot of conversation about natural gas supply issues and price increases in that industry that are going to carry their way into agriculture. And also, as you mentioned, food prices, and actually every aspect of our lives is being impacted significantly right now. And sure, farmers are on the front line of that as they wrap up harvest and start looking at the projections for next year or doing their typical fall applications of fertility that they're used to doing. They're running into some significant questions. And right now, all we've got to go on is speculation, what one person thinks or another person thinks. So the uncertainty in the market is just tremendous right now. And it's a scary time for all of us to think about how this is going to impact 2022.
And it's not just the prices that are the issue. It's really just shortages as well. A lot of these producers are telling us that they can't get access to a lot of the nutrients that they need.
We experienced with a lot of our scenarios this spring, freight issues, shipping issues were a challenge back then. They haven't certainly gotten fixed yet. We hope they're a little better. But yeah, everything seems to be upside down right now for what we're used to.
Right. And as with the cost of nitrogen and phosphorus, potassium, some of these other nutrients really going out the roof and becoming hard to get. The importance of ways for your soil biology to allow growers to reduce inputs and to rely more on what's either already in the soil or what's available in the atmosphere. And so that's something that we're focused on at Genesis Ag. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Chris, as you mentioned, the biological component of agriculture today is becoming a bigger subject. There's obviously a lot more people talking about it. I'm really excited to be associated with Genesis Ag, though, because Philip and Josh have been working in the biological realm for many years. So we're not newcomers to this market or to the knowledge that's out there or the things that are going on. So what I'm seeing within Genesis is, you're right, the idea of being able to become more efficient with a lot of the nutrients that we've either already applied or that we can gain as you referenced, the microbial nitrogen cycle. There is a lot of biology that has the capabilities of helping us to produce a crop more efficiently. And it's something that we're just now starting to move into and do a better job of understanding and how to work with it.
Right. And there's a lot of thoughts in that area. And there have been at times some resistance of people to, like all of us, to change the way we do things and the way we've done things for decades. But now it's almost becoming we don't have another choice scenario, because while these inputs certainly fluctuate, necessarily see them getting really cheap anytime in the future. And if we can do anything to reduce our inputs, reduce our costs, and also to reduce our impact on the environment, then it's certainly going to be important for us to focus on that.
Exactly. And with what we're seeing with the biology that we work with within Genesis Ag is the ability to improve a person's efficiency of the nutrients that they have applied, which is going to be critical this upcoming year. If there is a shortage, the ability to not access the amount of nutrients a customer might want, or even just due to pricing need to adjust their budgets. Being able to work with the biology to improve the efficiency of the products that you're putting down can be a huge step forward and be a big help maintaining those yields that guys are used to, but also that most of us can't afford to go out and do without nitrogen and potentially significantly impact our crops' potential. But if we can work with some biological components and maintain that yield, but do it more efficiently, then that becomes big.
And you've worked with a lot of customers over the past, several years who've really started, dropping back on their nitrogen inputs and also seeing some really good results. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Some of the experiences that we've had have been very eye-opening for some of my producers. It's been a learning process. One of the things we have to keep in mind when we start talking, especially if we focus, let's talk about nitrogen for right now. It seems to be the buzzword going around right now. In the marketplace right now, there's a wide range of efficiencies that people are using to grow the crops. I've got producers that are still figuring a pound, maybe even the 1.2 pounds of nitrogen per bushel that they feel like they need to use. I have other producers that may be down at 0.85 pounds doing split applications and learning to manage it, or wide dropping, fertigation, different things that they have available to them. So we have to look at where we're starting to begin with. How efficient are we? What kind of situation are we in? But for some of the producers that are especially at the higher end of that realm, I think there's some tremendous opportunities to do some improvements and efficiencies, again, depending on how they're set up, what capabilities they have. But some of the things that I've been seeing with some of my producers, just a couple of, for instances, last year, and I don't have a lot of results in from this current year, but I know last year, some of the results we had, producers that dropped 50 pounds out of one of the Y drops, very high production scenario. He dropped 50 pounds off of one of his Y drop applications and actually came up with a 7 bushel yield increase on that plot. I had another producer that I'm not sure if it was on purpose or inadvertently forgot to turn the Y drop on a significant, almost 50% reduction in his overall nitrogen application. And looking at the yield maps at the end of the year, you could not pick that area out. Now, I don't want to tell everybody out there to go out and slash your nitrogen in half, especially, the first year that you may be working with biologicals. But I think there's some tremendous opportunities, depending on where a person's starting, to look at some things that maybe they can do different.
And this is not just a passing fad. This has been going on for years. If you research the microbial possibilities that we can get with these inputs with the microbial nitrogen cycle, it's been around for a good while. And we're seeing more and more people realize that this really is going to have to be the future for farms to be sustainable. And of course, that's a very broad word that has a lot of meanings. But to really keep these soils fertile and to keep the ground productive, this is going to be just something that's not going to really be even an option for us in the future.
Certainly, there are definitely places around the country where there are watershed issues already, with regulations being put in place on the amount of nutrients that people can apply. So that's a scenario where the farmer doesn't have as much control to begin with. But just in the efficiency of managing your operation and some of the things that we're finding, there was a system put in place out here when the world was created to sustain plant growth and to sustain the soil and sustain productivity. And we're just now learning to work with that a little bit. But it's coming and it's changing, and it's going to change the face of agriculture as we go into the future.
And not just that, one of the huge emphasis in the food industry today is food quality, the safety of the food, organic, of course, even taking things beyond that. But people want food, their intake, to be as healthy as humanly possible. And if we're working with nature, relying on and partnering with the biology that's already in the soil, atmospheric components that we can utilize through nitrogen fixation, then in the long term, it's going to be healthier for all of us.
Yes, Chris, it definitely is a step in that direction. There's a bigger and bigger movement all the time, as you mentioned, toward consumers' concern for the way their food sources are grown, the safety of them. And it is important. Oftentimes in agriculture, we feel like people are blaming farmers that we're not doing the best job we can. And it's very easy for us in the industry to become defensive and say, hey, we're doing the best we can. And we are. But I think we do need to keep an eye to the future and realize that food safety for everyone is important. We all know that the food that we produce on our farms, we're not afraid to feed to our families. But that doesn't mean that we can't do things maybe a little bit better as we go forward as well. And incorporating biological components can definitely help us move to a more natural state. We're finding plants that are a little bit healthier as the people who work with our biologicals a little bit more, hoping to move to the point where maybe we can reduce some of the synthetic inputs, some of the things that may cause concerns for the consumer. And I think we can find ways to do even better with our food safety components and aspects.
Right. And Mark, you talked about the nitrogen fixation and how important that is because it can really reduce inputs on some of these farms. And of course, there's no guarantees, right? There are a lot of variables out there, and that's just farming, right? Everything is constantly changing. We're talking about life forms. These crops are alive, and we have limited control over things like that, over nature, over weather. And so there's certainly no guarantees with this, but it's like with our own bodies, we can't take a vitamin today and suddenly we're healthy. It takes time to accomplish things when we start doing the right things for our own health. And so it's really like that on our farms, isn't it?
Chris, you hit on a couple of very important topics or subjects there, and I'll try to dive into them just a little bit with you. The first thing that I heard you talk about is every situation can be different. The dynamics of crop growth, when you really start assessing it and looking at the interactions between the soil and the biology and the plants, it's very complex. And it can be weather dependent. It can be dependent upon a lot of things. It's dependent upon soil variability. Different soils have different capabilities. So there's really a lot of things that do go into it. It's very difficult to make a one-size-fits-all scenario. And as you mentioned, there certainly are no guarantees because of all of those variables. But we're finding a lot of common scenarios where we can have big improvements, especially in the nutrient efficiency within our crops. A lot of the focus today is certainly on nitrogen management, and it does have a lot of room for learning and improvement, but that's only one component. Obviously, that's one nutrient of the many that it takes to grow a crop. And I really like the fact with Genesis Ag that we're very diverse in our product lineup and in the way we approach it. We're not focused just on nitrogen. We use a lot of things that are to move us toward a more efficient state with our phosphorus and with some of our micronutrients. This dynamic community in the soil is designed to make available to that plant all of the nutrients that it needs, but there's not one microbe that does all of that. There are thousands of microbes out here in the soil, and we're trying to focus on the ones we feel are the most important and have the most impact that we're aware of currently, and promote those and encourage those within our soils. And we're finding some big improvements in that, but it's a process. It takes time. It takes learning how to manage that biology. I've heard it said that we need to learn to manage the livestock in our soil as intensively as we manage the livestock that's above the soil. And there's a lot to that as well. I don't think there's necessarily one size fits all. And I think that's why it's important for people to realize that there is a little bit of a learning curve and it's going to be a process. And that journey is going to be a little bit different probably for every producer.
And we talk about starting slow. Don't go out in all of your acres with this program or really any program, because there are so many variables out there. There are so many detrimental pathogens, what we call the bad bacteria and the bad fungi out there. So we recommend people start slowly and be methodical in what they're doing, take good notes, pay very close attention. And we also, when you see people talking about these magic bullets, even though we have seen over and over again that the biological program that Genesis offers can help farmers to reduce their inputs. That's clear. We're seeing it over and over again. It's not 100%. There are going to be circumstances where that doesn't happen. But when you see people talking about magic bullet formulas, what do you think when you see that?
I think most of my experience, Chris, my background, I grew up farming, spent a lot of years on our family farm. So I've tried a lot of those magic bullets, and sometimes it seems like those magic bullets are just shooting ourselves in the foot. One of the things that has really come to the forefront for me in working with Genesis, and as we've learned more and more, and as technology has changed, our ability to monitor things and to test things is so much different today. And I've got producers that see tremendous yield increases very quickly. Scenarios work out where they see a great yield response or a great response from reducing their nitrogen, but still maintaining yields. I have other scenarios where the yield response may not be as profound, but when we are testing certain things in the soil with some of the new ways that we're doing things and just watching the physical changes in the soil, we can see there's changes happening. And I talk a lot with my clients that we have to look at what the yardstick we're measuring our progress with. What are the tools that we're measuring that with? Obviously, yield is important, and we understand that. We want people to maintain or increase their yields. Absolutely. That's the overall goal. But in that process, sometimes it takes some time to do that. And we have to learn to look for small changes. We have to look for changes in the soil structure. I've done things like slake tests and water infiltration tests that have shown dramatic, and you've seen some of them, you videoed a couple of them, dramatic differences in the soil texture or the soil structure and the ability for it to take in water, which is huge. It's just an indicator of that soil's overall health. But when we get to the end of the year, we may not see the strikingly different yield increase every year. So we have to be realistic and realize, as you said, there's no magic bullet that's going to work everywhere. And everybody's journey, as I mentioned, is going to be a little bit different. I think what a person has to do is decide, do I believe that improving my soil's health will, in the long run, improve my farm's capability to pass down through the generations? And for me, that's the important thing. If a producer really wants to change their farm, it needs to be a long-term goal, not a one-year goal. You have to be looking farther down the road and making the commitments to make some investments into your operation that will help you long-term.
When we focus on just yield, we're almost being unfair to ourselves and really having almost the wrong metric that we're trying to measure. I know that obviously without yield, we're not sustainable from a financial standpoint. So certainly yield is huge. But using the physical body analogy, if we go to the doctor, we've been on maybe a weight loss kick. We go to the doctor, we've only lost a couple of pounds, but our blood pressure is better. Our A1C levels are better. Our cholesterol levels are better. We got all these wonderful improvements that you can't see. You can't see any of those improvements with the physical eye. And I would correlate that with yield being the weight and everything else that's good for the plant, for the environment, for your soil, being those intangible things that maybe we could only see with a blood test. And so I may be disappointed that my weight didn't drop off, but wow, look at those other health indicators that long-term are going to help me be sustainable. It's going to help me hopefully have a longer life. And hopefully the weight will come along with that as being a part of that process. So I know we definitely, can look at that and anything can impact it. I was thinking about, I have a lot of blueberry bushes, and they can be very healthy in the spring, just doing amazing, tons of buds. And this is going to be a banner year for blueberries. And all it takes is one morning in the late spring to get that nice heavy frost, or even maybe a light frost. And what happens to my yield? It's gone. Even though I did all the right things, that one singular event can impact my yield. And that can happen in the farm, in the garden, whatever else. So it's another thing about this. We're always at the mercy of things beyond our control. And I know we want to immediately affix blame to that, but sometimes it's just the way it is.
You're exactly right, Chris. We can do things on the front end of a growing season that set us up for a better yield, and something can come along, as you mentioned, one event, and take that advantage away. And we have to look at the season overall to assess that. I share a lot in my meetings, a couple of things. The first thing I would really like to address, though, as you talked about, we have to look at our yield and our budget. And I try to impress upon my clients that I want to try to help them be budget neutral. If they want to incorporate our biological program, if they've been using some other type of a starter program, I want to replace that with the biological component. If they're not using an in-furrow or a starter program, but maybe they've been pushing their nutrient levels a little bit more, maybe we can adjust those back. I really want a producer to be budget neutral, so that if we can maintain yield at where it's at or improve it, that makes things better for them. But they're also making a long-term investment in improving their soils and improving their farm and their operation for down the road. Incorporating a biological program doesn't necessarily have to have a negative impact upon a person's cash flow scenario or their budget. So I think that's an important component that people need to think about as well.
Do you see wider adoption going forward with biological practices, or do you think we'll just simply return to our old ways if the input costs get lower in the future?
Chris, I think that we definitely will see more people looking at the biological approach. And I think we're going to see an increasing adoption of it. Yes, definitely. Whether we're farmers or just humans in general, we all have a tendency to revert back to what's comfortable. So, yes, there will definitely be some people who may jump in a little bit and then revert back to the old ways, as you put it, things that they were used to. But I think it does open the opportunity for Genesis Ag to improve our position in the market with the successes we've had with our product line and the things that we're continuing to learn. It's an exciting time for me to be involved because, yes, it is forcing guys to look at alternatives, maybe more, and if they'll be open to what changes are happening in their fields and in their crops, yeah, I think we're definitely going to see an increase in their adoption.
Mark, I guess that's all the time we really have for today. We will wrap things up, and I do appreciate you being with us today and sharing your expertise and knowledge with us.
Thanks, Chris.
And we will hopefully do this again very soon. And we hope everyone out there can join us again for the next edition of the Genesis Ag Podcast.